Okay, it is 3 p.m. Welcome to this webinar, perhaps one of the final academic events that we are all a part of before the holidays start. And I know that some of you, like me, haven't bought all your Christmas gifts, so it is busy and we need to do a lot of shopping and get our houses ready. And that is why we've decided to do a very short and snappy webinar, only 45 minutes. So it's 3 p.m. It's a cold and well, not a, it's actually a nice day in Oslo. I'm coming to you from my basement. My name is Dan Banik. I am a professor of political science at the University of Oslo, and I am the academic director of the Circle U Knowledge Hub on Democracy. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar with the title Democracy in the Age of AI or Artificial Intelligence, Opportunities and Challenges. And as you will notice from the title, we are not just interested in exploring all the negative aspects of AI, because there are also lots of positive things related to development, related to democracy that we could perhaps hope for, and hopefully we will achieve these. So, as most of you perhaps have been thinking, or you've been bombarded with lots of perspectives and information, the relationship between AI and democracy can be contentious, at least from the positive aspect. You can say that AI will profoundly impact our democracies because it can enhance citizen participation, improve the efficiency of decision making. It can also foster greater accountability. But there's also the danger, and there are some inherent risks, especially connected with misinformation and disinformation that I'm sure you've been hearing about, manipulation of information, and perhaps even the amplification of existing inequality. So the positives, there's also a lot of the concerns that we have. So the key questions for us today in this webinar is to ask maybe two or three sort of very interrelated questions. One is, how and to what extent can AI be a force for good in our democracies? That is one aspect. And then the second related one is, how and to what extent can we prevent AI from becoming a tool for those who wish to undermine democratic institutions and trust? To discuss this, I am joined by my, I would say, a new colleague in Circle U, Francesco Marcelloni, who is a professor of data mining and machine learning at the University of Pisa and is the person who knows most about AI in my network. So I am super excited to be collaborating with Francesco, who has also recently been appointed as the academic director of the Circle U Knowledge Hub on AI. And the format today, because again, I know you're all very busy, 45 minutes. Francesco speaks for like 20 minutes. He's going to give you an overview of some of the major debates and show you some slides. And then I will reflect on this democracy AI relationship from a political science perspective and also development perspective. And then we'll also take questions and comments. And I have my colleague Øystein Moen from the University of Oslo. He's monitoring the chat. And he's going to make sure that I know of any interesting comments or questions you may have so that Francesco and I can discuss these. So with those words, welcome to this webinar. This is organized by Circle U, the European University Alliance. And I wish to give the floor now to my colleague, Francesco Marcelloni.
Thank very much, Dan. And it's a really very big pleasure just to stay here and to have the possibility just to really introduce in a very short time something about AI. But I want to also just to talk at the end of this very short presentation about how we can use the AI in democracy and also the possible problems that we can really have. I share my slides just to start. Okay. Okay, can you just see everyone? Okay. Okay, just I want to really start with a very short introduction. First of all, I want just to really mention this information that's probably is not really very new for most of the people, but it's very interesting because this term AI was coined for the first time in 1950. 1956, means approximately 70 years ago. But for a long time, AI was really relegated to some laboratory research, or we had the possibility just to really analyze the AI in some movie where normally the AI was often depicted as a technology against the humanities. And actually, this is one of the questions I normally receive when I have some talk. But it's true that the AI will really destroy the humanity in the future. So, and of course, the AI isn't technology, so we can have a very good use, a very bad use. And in the last slides in this presentation, I will talk about the good use for democracy of the AI, but of course, also the possible risk that we have with the use of the AI. Just a very short introduction, really to understand what can be the problem that we have with the AI. And the foundation of the AI is today, at least, the machine learning. What is the machine learning? Is really the process to enable the computers to learn autonomously from data. This is a very big change for people like me with a background in computer science, computer engineering. What is the reason why? Because in the past we had just a problem and we wrote the code to solve the problem. Today we have the problem, but we write the code just to learn from data a model that solved the problem. So we change a little the perspective. But what is interesting, that's the basis of really the machine learning, is just to learn from data. And that this is actually the advantage, but it's also the big problem. Why? Because if the data are not very good, of course, the model that you can produce normally is affected by a number of problems. We will try just to discuss some of these problems during this presentation, but of course, we have to take in consideration that the data are normally noisy, are affected by bias, for instance, by different type of problems, and these problems can become really the reality in the model. So today we talk about two types of AI. One is the classic traditional AI, also denoted as discriminative AI. And for this type of AI, for instance, we can solve classification problems, very typical classification problem. In the slide, you can see just a classification problem related to some painting from different painters. And this system is able just to really classify the painting related to the painters. Okay, this is a typical classification problem. And this discriminative model that we can really generate by using some learning algorithms estimates the probability P y given x of a class y given an observation x. In the last years, we just started to talk about generative AI. And I also think that the generative AI open the dimension of AI to the public opinion, because today everyone talk about AI, but most of time think about the generative AI, the AI that you can use, for instance, by using ChatGPT. In this case, we just have a learning process, but the generative model that we can learn estimates the probability px of observing an observation x. This allows this model, a very complex model normally, just to associate tests and to really have the possibility to generate tests in the case of ChatGPT, at least the first examples that we had. But of course, we know we can also generate images, for instance. What is interesting, just this was an estimation from McKinsey & Company. The generative AI could create an annual economic value of 6 to 9 trillions of dollars. And traditional AI, in any case, contributes between 11 to 18 trillion dollars annually to the global economy. And we discussed some days ago in a talk about if really we can think that AI will really be present along in our life. I strongly believe that this AI will be really present in our life in the future. But why we just have today this really this boom of AI? I think we have five ingredients that's a very fundamental. I don't have time to discuss, but I want just introduce very briefly because this is part of the evolution of AI, in my opinion. The fourth ingredient is technological development. Today we have great computer power and almost infinite storage capacity. In the plot that you have on the right in the slide, you can see the stock price return for NVIDIA. And you know, NVIDIA is one of the producers of the GPU. These are the process units for AI, and you can really appreciate the increase in value of NVIDIA, and they just testify the increase of value in technology that we have for AI. Second ingredients, new learning algorithms. In particular, we have the algorithms that allow us just to have the generative AI. And what is incredible is really the complexity of these really models that we are able to build. If we want just to really give some numbers, for GPT-3, we had 175 billion parameters. For GPT-4, they talk about approximately 1,000 billion parameters. Of course, just to really train this model, we really need a lot of time. For GPT-3, we needed 26 days, but of course not using our notebook, but using a very powerful system. And another information that is very interesting, also talking about sustainability in the future, just the energy consumption for training GPT-3 was approximately equivalent to the annual electricity usage of about 400 families of 4 people. And this is just the energy consumption, but we can also consider that we have a lot of water consumption when we just want to really train these very big systems. Third ingredients, availability of a large amount of data. When I talk with my students, often I talk about the data set we used when I started at least this type of work. Some years ago, we talked about a very famous data set. The name was Iris. The iris, the flower of iris. And the number of instances was 150. And 4 features to describe each instance is nothing today. We talk today about terabytes of data. Just for the training of GPT-3, we used 45 terabytes of text data. And of course, you have to collect this data from different sources. When we talk about GPT-3, we use it really as sources, most of the time web information, but we know that these are not reliable. And this is another of the problem with which we have to cope. Fourth and fifth ingredients, impact on everyday life. Today, AI is really pervasive. We have AI in the smartphone, we have in the security and surveillance, we have in social media platform, we have in navigation, but we have everywhere, of course. And the people can appreciate the presence of the AI. Fifth, but not least, large investment. Any country is really investing on AI. The situation is different, and if you like, we can talk about this later, because of course, in the United States, we have a lot of private investment in AI, just for the big companies. In Europe, we have some public investment, but we don't have really this big private company to invest in AI. So the investment in the United States is approximately 62.2 billions, 77, sorry, 2 billions in 2023. And in Europe, the top three EU countries, Germany, Sweden, France, amount to around 5.5 billions. So we can really appreciate the difference in this case. But what are the risks? Because we talked about the powerful of the AI, and we will talk about application of AI in a short time. But what are the possible risks that we have? In my opinion, we have two types of risk. The first type is inherent to AI models that are, as we told before, generated through learning algorithms. And we told before that if we have problems with the data, we will have normally problems also in the model we are generating. Which type of solution we have? In this type of risk, we have to work from a technological point of view. So we have just to make research to avoid this type of problems. And we have a large research community working over the world in this type of problems. We have another type of risk, are the risks arising from the misuse of AI. So how you really use the AI. The AI is a wonderful technology if you want to use just with the respecting the humans. But of course, you can also use, unfortunately, against the humans. In this case, we need regulations. What is the big problem for the regulations? That we have a regulation in Europe with the AI Act, but not all the countries in the world have regulation, and also if they have regulations, these regulations are different from one country to another country. So does not exist a global regulation for AI. And we know this is a big problem that we have normally in the community. Just to give you some example of the risk that are inherent in the technology. The most famous probably risk is described by this gender biases. And this was in the recruiting tool used by Amazon. We have a strong gender bias to the historical data. Amazon is really a big warehouse, if you think, and normally they just hire people that was male employee. So this system taught itself that male candidates were preferable. And in some way penalized, of course, resume that included the words humans and something related to humans. Just as a joke, but when I talk with my female colleagues, and they just make this example just to really claim that also the AI in some way can be just a male AI. In which sense? If you just see what's actually the proportion between a male and female employee in very big companies, you have a large majority of male employee. So someone start to really tell that in the perspective, also the AI could, in general, could have some bias, of course. Another example is the racial bias. In this case, this is an example from the USA healthcare system. That's normally they just use to identify and assist patients with complex health needs. In this case, we have that black patients are considerably sicker than white patients, as evidenced by sign of uncontrolled illnesses. What was the reason? The reason was that this system was based on the money spent by the people just for the care. And what was the problem? That's the black patient normally doesn't have so much money just to spend. And of course, they start to really spend money when really the illness is very, very terrible. And this was the reason for this bias. Another interesting aspect, just talking about generative AI, is the risk of hallucination. What is an hallucination? Is just an output produced by generative AI that is false. And in this case, the very interesting case was the chatbot used in Air Canada website. The chatbot informed a customer that the airline offered discounted fare for passenger booking a last-minute trip due to personal tragedies. This information was partially true because it was true that there was this discount, but it was not true that the customer could just really buy the ticket, just make the flight, and just to come back to receive the money back. So they really should really buy directly the ticket with this discount. The customer just sued the company for compensation in the civil court. The airline was ordered to compensate. And what is very, very important is really was what the judge wrote. Although the chatbot as an interactive component, it is still only part of the Air Canada website. It should be clear to Air Canada that it is responsible for all the information of the website. This means that if you use large language model as really a background of a chatbot, in any case, you are responsible for possible hallucination. And this is actually is a very interesting aspect. But what are really the potential impact of AI in democracy? First of all, I want just to show you with the green color what is actually positive aspect, and with the red color what's really can be the risk of the use of the AI against in some way democracy. First of all, when we talk about citizen engagement, we can have really some very beneficial aspect because we can really have some AI-driven platform for public consultation. It's like we can use AI just to analyze large volume of citizen feedback and this can enable government to understand the public sentiment and just make some informed decisions. This is very, very important, I think. But we can have also just have other possible advantages like chatbot, for instance, for civic education. We can use the AI just to really educate citizens about democratic processes. On the other side, we can use the AI just also to manipulate the public opinion. This, of course, is the possible risk. So AI can have really some positive effect, but also some negative effects, depend on the use, of course. In the case of manipulation of public opinion, we could really use micro-targeting to deliver personalized political messages, potentially manipulating voters. This is, as we know, is an old story because when there was just USA president elections for 80 years ago, we had just a long discussion about this potential of AI just to affect really the possible election. Other possibility, policy making. We could have that AI can analyze complex data to help policymakers craft more effective and targeted policies. This is very, very interesting because you can just make decision with some informed analysis. But on the other side, we can have that the automation of decision making just can reduce accountability and democratic oversight. So again, we have advantage, but we can have also a disadvantage. In terms of disinformation, this is interesting because, especially in my research in the last period, I'm using AI just to detect fake news. So we can exploit AI to detect and flag misleading or false information. But on the other side, we can just use AI just to spread disinformation. In terms of marginalized groups, we can exploit AI, for instance, as language translation. or accessibility tools. And this can help just to explain, for instance, political materials for people, for instance, immigrants, just using multiple languages. But on the other side, as we analyzed in the previous slides, we can have that AI can be affected by some bias. So if we use some AI system, we can just also have these problems of biases. Other effect, political participation. Mm. We can just use AI to develop platform just as tool that can involve more citizens in decision making. But on the other side, we can use these tools to analyze the behavior of the people. So in some way, it's like we can have an AI system that's enable intrusive surveillance, undermining citizens' privacy rights. Information support. We can just deliver personalized use using AI, because I can just write the news in such a way that we can really build for personalized news. But on the other side, I can just use AI to really prioritize engagement and exacerbate division by promoting sensationalist or divisive content. What is the conclusion of this democracy and AI relation? On the one side, as we told, AI can help democracy. On the other side, we should be very, very careful because AI can be used in such a way that we can really influence the democratical process. This is the reason why when we talk about AI today, we talk about good AI, in which we should really have an AI taking consideration ethics, uh, legal aspect, social aspect, sustainability, and economy. And when we develop really AI system today, we don't need only some people from technical competencies, but we need also these other types of professional figures just to produce really this very good AI system, just taking consideration the relation with human being. I want just to conclude with some really aspect related to the knowledge hub of AI. This is a new entry in the Circle U community, and we want just to develop and just to use human-centered, inclusive, and equitable AI. And we want to promote the development and the use of robust, ethical, safe, trustworthy, and sustainable AI. This, in our opinion, is fundamental, and also the relation between this AI aspect and democracy. It's very, very important just to take in consideration all these aspects in relation with the humans and the society. Thank you very much. Of course, I am really here for questions and interaction with you and the people attending the webinar. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Francesco. That was a super good overview of some of the issues, which also means I don't have to repeat quite a lot of the points I had, but I thought I could reflect firstly on the bad and then end on the good. And hearing you speak, I was reminded of a conversation I had with a journalist in one of Norway's most important newspapers around 22 years ago when the internet, web pages were in their infancy. And this journalist was super excited that now there was technology that was going to be introduced that enabled him to interact with his readers. So before, you had the news article and then you had to write a letter to the editor that was time consuming. But now he said, you can look forward to the comment section. People can write and interact directly with the journalist. 22 years later, Francesco, the reality is very different from the expectation. Those comment sections have become full of hate, one-sided comments, not necessarily balanced. And so I think that is one of the dangers, that we sometimes put quite a lot of hope in the positives, and then we get something that is entirely different in reality. You also touched upon, digital public spaces, distrust, and I'm thinking about our kids and us. We started using Facebook, and now very many of us don't use Facebook. On Twitter, on X, it was fun at a certain point to debate. Now it is more just to put out information. You don't want to engage in debate because you don't want that kind of vitriol and hate to be
Yeah,
spread. And also, these platforms, while they democratize the space, if you think about the Arab Spring, in Tunisia and Egypt, there was quite a lot of attention 10 years ago on how social media was mobilizing people, and they did. If you think about what happened in Tahrir Square in Cairo, social media helped people to actually gather there and protest. Unfortunately, of course, not much has changed in terms of the politics. There was that initial hope, galvanizing potential of social media. Now we see that social media can be used in the opposite way to spread misinformation. And I'm thinking about a recent case. If you think about Donald Trump, his pick for the cabinet, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, who has, by the way, Norwegian ancestry. Now, there's been lots of critical reports about him. And there was a time, I just read this in the New York Times today. For the first 4 or 5 weeks, there was this feeling that he was going to, not be appointed. He did not have the votes. But then I just read today that a lot of the Republicans or the supporters of Trump have really mobilized themselves in the digital space and have really fought back against this critical perspective. And somehow those who were accusing the defense secretary pick of certain violations are themselves being targeted. So you see how something positive can be used negatively. I see this in many African elections, just, technology such as, voting machines. And now there's a lot of distrust. Can these be just monitored by some software so that the election results are sort of known beforehand? And I think that's something that we need to talk about, is that, if you think about the old media, it was about credibility. There was some editorial control and there was somebody controlling things, but now we've lost that. So I hope you guys can still see me. I think Francesco, I don't know if it's my connection or yours, Francesco. Anyway, and then of course, Francesco also mentioned the aspect of the erosion of privacy. That is a big problem. I hope, am I the one still online, or is it me that is offline?
No, you're still online,
Okay,
Don.
good, good. So Francesco is okay, good. I was just worried that it was me. Um, so Francesco mentioned the erosion of privacy, and I've been thinking a lot about, how there is really no privacy. I mean, we have CCTV cameras, we have chips in our cars that everybody knows basically where we are. It could be good because, it helps to solve murders and all kinds of other bad things, but it can also lead to this feeling that Big Brother is always watching us. And so, and a final concern that I have, and there's been quite a lot of literature now, is in terms of war and conflict. And, increasingly governments are relying on, as Francesco mentioned, on these large data sets to make decisions which are seen to be efficient, and these can also be related to weapon systems. And I was reading an article that in Foreign Policy magazine that was actually warning us about AI weapons and the dangerous illusion of human control. That we like to think that we're in control of our weapon systems, but in reality, the kind of control humans exercise over these systems may be much more limited than we think. And thereby, the risk of something happening, even democracies fighting each other, which, by the way, often does not happen, right? So there's this idea of a democratic peace, that democratic nations don't fight each other. The risk can perhaps increase that there will be a misunderstanding or a misjudgment that can lead to catastrophe. But that's all the bad stuff. Good to have you back, Francesco. Let me talk about some of the good aspects. And I work a lot on development and poverty reduction. And of course, in any type of improved governance, Francesco, that you were talking about, like all these data sets, all these points of decisions that can be used to sort of streamline decisions, to reach out to those who really need, for governments to better understand citizens' needs. That is in a way the essential aspect of democracy, that democracy allows us to articulate our needs. But the extent to which government politicians can sort of understand these needs is dependent on that kind of technology. So that could be good. Information and awareness. I mean, just the very fact that you can spread information through smartphones. We see smartphones having a huge impact in Asia and Latin America and also Africa. You think about, our countries, Francesco, are somewhat backward in terms of internet banking. Phones are used differently. I was in India and China earlier this year. Everything was being done on the phone, whereas here
Yeah.
we still use our credit cards. So it seems that apps, etc., have made, I mean, just give you an example of healthcare, just accessing easy healthcare, getting an insurance quote, ordering medicines. My father lives in India and I can buy his groceries and help him out. I could, get a lab to actually send technicians to collect his blood sample. I mean, just everything from Norway. So, I mean, all of that is just fantastic. But also, Francesco, one aspect I know that a lot of people, who are worried about climate change are hoping and they're placing their bets on technology and AI. That at the moment it looks like, we're heading for disaster, global warming can't be controlled. Maybe in the distant future. I'd like to be one of those optimists. I don't think we can only rely on AI, but maybe AI can give us some sort of solution that could be implementable to address some of the dangers related to climate change. But also in relation to, poverty, global poverty, that is a huge problem. How do we actually harness the power of AI in the global south, in developing countries, in terms of agricultural productivity, transportation? I mean, we are having all these driverless vehicles. Imagine the kind of impact this could have in many, many other parts of the world, infrastructure, communication. My wife was telling me yesterday that, one of the big challenges with education, even in a country like Norway, is that children's education is often highly dependent on the education and awareness of the parents, right? So there's actually a bias there that you learn more if your parents can help you out at home. It's not just at school. AI can perhaps, combat that inequality and thereby level the playing field, which I think could be super exciting. I was also reading an article about, cardiovascular care and digital twin technology. I mean, you can try out medicines and treatments in your sort of avatar, your digital twin, before you test it out on yourself. So I think that all of these issues that we can discuss, and I'm sure some of you have questions, and I'm sure Øystein will. Well, he says to me now that there are no questions, so we still have some time. But I wanted to just conclude my short intervention by also, highlighting something that I was discussing with Daron Acemoglu, who got the Nobel Prize in Economics this year. He and his co-Nobel Prize winner, Simon Johnson, wrote this book called Power and Progress. And one of the major arguments there for Daron is that, and I have a podcast that I'll put out a link to where you can listen to this discussion. His major argument, Francesco, and I'd like to hear your views on it, is the extent to which we as citizens can control the evolution of AI, right? That it should not be based on Silicon Valley elites who decide on how AI evolution will take place, that we should always have some sort of a check on this. But of course, and you were referring to the regulation in Europe, etc. The extent to which that is going to be possible, can we hold this huge development in check? Because it's just going at a very rapid pace, and we may lose track. So that's one issue. But I also think there's the other issue, and that is trust. If we don't have trust, and I think that is where some of the concerns are, right? I mean, it seems that we are distrustful of
Yeah.
machines and robots. And if we can't build trust going forward, that is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Any comments, suggestions from
Yeah.
Francesco?
I think especially in trans, this is a very interesting aspect because a lot of researchers are working really in this type of aspect in the trustworthy AI. Also, if the idea is just really to make the system in some way explainable, so just to give the possibility to explain how the system is able just to really arrive at the output from the input. But in any case, I think that we should be careful also in this aspect. Because if the people start to really trust too much on this system, it's like the people can really lose the independence of decisions. So again, we have always these two dimensions. On one side, AI can help. On the other side, we should be careful. And I agree with you that the citizens some way should really control the evolution of AI. But just to control, the citizens should have really the knowledge about how this AI system in some way work, and also just to understand if this AI system can be tricky in some way. So in the sense that they can really just produce some output that is not the correct output, and we should be able, in any case, just to interact with them. Normally, when we just discuss about the evolution of AI today, we talk about a sort of a co-evolution in which we have the humans and the AI that's co-evolved together.
Yeah.
In which sense? On the one side, you have the human that interact with the AI system and just produce feedback for the AI system, but the AI system just support the human in the decision. But this process should be really a sort of co-evolution, and should be the correct way just to analyze the future for the AI.
Good. That is really important. And I've been thinking in relation to democracy or authoritarian systems. Um, the proof of the eating is in the pudding, right? So you have to think about the benefits, and I think in this context, Francesco, we have to also think that when we talk about controlling AI, the evolution, etc., a lot of this discourse is very Western centric, is Europe,
Yeah.
America centric, and we have to really think a little bit about the perspectives of Asia, Latin America, Africa, the global South countries, where I'm not saying that there is less interest in democracy, but because the problems of poverty or climate change are so severe that, the first concern one has is survival. And if technology can help me survive, oh, by the way, technology should not take my job away, so that's the danger, right? Automation can lead to
Yeah.
unemployment. So, and if that is the case, what do we do with the people? I mean, we have to find new ways. So, you can have AI as a solution in many, I was mentioning climate change, etc., agriculture, whatever, but it can also take your job away. And just to build that trust is going to be important. But my point here is that in parts of the world where development problems are so precarious that if AI can solve this, people may be willing to trade off democratic freedoms because it's making my life easier. And so there may be a danger, at least from our perspective, that to solve a problem could lead to people trusting AI more.
I agree with you, but in any case, we have just taken consideration that the people should really preserve some specific competencies just to decide.
Yeah,
This is my point of view. I mean, it's when we talk about, for instance, AI in education, today this is we have just to discuss this problem because AI can help during the learning process, but we should be really be conscious that in any case we have to have in the end some learning outcomes
yeah,
and we have to decide what are the learning outcomes, and we have just to analyze the process. But what is fundamental at the end of this learning process, we should really have people that is able just to think, is able just to decide. And only in this way, I think, so we can really have this correct balance between innovation with AI and, of course, the human being.
exactly. And that is where, just to end on that positive note, I think the real challenge is for us as students, as academics, as policymakers, as civil society actors, is to be critical of the information available, is to look at it from an independent perspective, not just a one-sided view, and also be balanced. So critical, independent, balanced for me is the way forward, if that is possible.
Yeah,
So it's already quarter two. It's exactly 45 minutes. Francesco, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank
just
you
a
very
pleasure.
much for all of you. I don't see you had questions, or if there were, I'm sorry I did not see them. We'll put this out on YouTube, so in case you haven't watched it before, you will be able to watch it now. Thank you, Øystein Moen, who's helped us with this webinar, and thank you, Francesco. I'm really looking forward to our collaboration and to further exploring this democracy AI relationship. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you. Bye
Bye.
bye.